I was leaning against my kitchen counter, sipping my morning coffee and watching the fresh snow fall outside my window in Whitefish, Montana, when my phone buzzed with an email from the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association. My gut immediately tightened because nothing good ever came from those people, especially not from their president, Patricia Henderson. The email was brief and dripping with passive-aggressive language. Apparently, my snowmobile had been creating excessive noise pollution during unreasonable hours, and I needed to cease and desist immediately or face appropriate legal action. I read it twice, feeling my blood pressure rise with each word. It was 7:30 in the morning on a Saturday. I had been riding my snowmobile at 2 in the afternoon yesterday, in broad daylight, on the designated trail that ran along the back of our properties. There was nothing excessive or unreasonable about it. I set my phone down and looked out at my garage where my Arctic cat sat, gleaming white and blue. I had saved for 2 years to buy that machine, and riding it through the Montana wilderness was one of the few pleasures I had after my divorce finalized last spring. The trails around Whitefish were legendary, some of the best in the entire state, and I had every legal right to use them. The HOA covenants said nothing about snowmobiles. I had checked 3 times before I even bought the thing. My neighbor, Jake, had warned me about Patricia when I moved into Pine Ridge 2 years ago. He said she treated the HOA like her personal fiefdom, sending violation notices for everything from mailbox colors to the height of shrubs. I had managed to stay off her radar until now, mostly by keeping my head down and following every ridiculous rule to the letter. But apparently, enjoying my own property was a bridge too far. I decided to ignore the email and go about my day. If Patricia wanted to escalate things, she would need more than a vague complaint about noise. I had rights as a property owner, and I was not about to let some power-hungry busybody dictate how I spent my weekends. That afternoon, I loaded up my gear and headed out to the trails. The snow had stopped, leaving everything covered in a pristine white blanket. The temperature hovered around 20 degrees, perfect riding weather. I fired up the Arctic Cat, feeling the familiar rumble of the engine, and headed toward the national forest land that bordered our subdivision. The trail system here connected to hundreds of miles of groomed paths, maintained by the local snowmobile club that I had joined back in October. I spent 3 hours out there, carving through the powder, navigating the winding trails through lodgepole pine forests and across frozen meadows. The stress of the email melted away with each mile. This was freedom, pure and simple. When I finally returned home around 5 in the evening, I felt better than I had in weeks. The next morning, Sunday, I woke up to find another email from Patricia. This one was longer and even more aggressive. She claimed to have documented evidence of my ongoing harassment of the community, and stated that the HOA board would be holding an emergency meeting on Tuesday evening to discuss enforcement options. The email copied the entire board, including her Vice President Linda Morrison, Treasurer Gary Chen, and Secretary Robert Walsh. I fired back a response, keeping my tone professional but firm. I pointed out that I had reviewed the HOA covenants thoroughly and found no restrictions on snowmobile use. I noted that the trails I was using were public access, and that I was riding during reasonable daytime hours. I requested copies of whatever documented evidence she claimed to have and reminded her that any enforcement action would need to follow proper procedures, including notice and an opportunity to respond. Her reply came within 10 minutes. It was short and icy. Your defiance has been noted. Expect consequences. I showed the email exchange to Jake that evening when he came over to watch the football game, He whistled low and shook his head. Man, you have really pissed her off. Patricia does not like being challenged. What's she going to do? I asked. Send me another strongly worded email. Don't underestimate her, Jake said. Last year, she reported the Hendersons for having their trash cans visible from the street 15 minutes before collection time. She took photos, measured distances, the whole 9 yards. They ended up with a $1,000 fine that they had to fight in court. For trash cans. For trash cans. And she won, technically, because the covenant says they have to be concealed until collection day. Never mind that the truck came early that week. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Montana winter. She actually sued them. The HOA did. But everyone knows it was Patricia pushing it. She wanted to make an example. I spent Monday working from home, doing my job as a remote software developer and trying not to think about the Tuesday meeting. But by Monday evening, I could not stand it anymore. I pulled up the HOA covenants again and read through every single page. There was absolutely nothing about snowmobiles, motor vehicles beyond standard automotive restrictions, or noise beyond the standard no loud parties after 10 p.m. clause. I was in the clear legally. Tuesday afternoon, I received a certified letter. I signed for it at the door, feeling that knot in my stomach return. Inside was an official notice from the Pine Ridge HOA informing me that I was in violation of Section 7, Subsection 4, Paragraph 3, which addressed maintenance of community standards and prevention of nuisance activities. The notice stated that my snowmobile use constituted a nuisance, and that I was required to attend the emergency board meeting that evening at 7 p.m. to address the complaint. Failure to attend would result in automatic fines. I looked up the section they cited. It was the vaguest possible language, basically a catch-all that said residents could not engage in activities that unreasonably interfered with other residents' quiet enjoyment of their properties. It was the kind of clause that could mean anything or nothing, depending on interpretation. At 6:45 that evening, I walked to the community center, a small building at the entrance to Pine Ridge that hosted HOA meetings and the occasional neighborhood event. The temperature had dropped to 15 degrees, and my breath came out in white clouds. Inside, folding chairs were arranged in rows facing a long table where the board members sat. Patricia was in the center, looking like she was presiding over a trial. She was in her late 40s, with severely styled blonde hair and a permanent expression of disapproval. She wore a burgundy blazer and had a stack of folders in front of her. About 15 other residents were scattered in the chairs. Most looked curious or bored. Jake had come to support me and gave me a nod when I sat down beside him. Patricia called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of her gavel. She went through some routine business first, approval of last meeting's minutes, and a discussion about snow removal contracts. Then she got to the main event. Item 7 on tonight's agenda concerns a noise complaint filed by multiple residents regarding snowmobile activity, Patricia said, her voice crisp and formal. The board has reviewed the complaint and believes there is sufficient cause for enforcement action. Multiple residents. I said, standing up. Who exactly has complained? Patricia looked at me with barely concealed irritation. The identities of complainants are kept confidential to prevent retaliation. That's convenient, I said. How do I defend myself against anonymous accusations? This is not a court of law, Mr. Vaughn, Patricia said. This is an HOA proceeding. The board has discretion to evaluate complaints as we see fit. And I have a right to know who's making accusations against me, I countered. The covenants say I'm entitled to notice and an opportunity to respond. Anonymous complaints don't meet that standard. Linda Morrison, the vice president, cleared her throat. She was older than Patricia, probably in her 60s, and seemed less comfortable with the confrontation. We have received 3 written complaints about snowmobile noise over the past week. The complaints describe excessive engine noise during afternoon hours that interferes with residents' ability to work from home and disrupts the peaceful nature of the community. 3 complaints, I said. Out of how many homes in this subdivision? 60. That's 5%, and I'm willing to bet at least one of those complaints came from Patricia herself. Several residents chuckled. Patricia's face flushed. That's beside the point. The covenants clearly state that nuisance activities are prohibited. Snowmobiling isn't a nuisance, I said. It's a normal recreational activity in Montana. I'm riding on public trails during the daytime. I'm not breaking any laws or HOA rules. Gary Chen, the treasurer, spoke up. He was a thin man in his 30s who always looked uncomfortable at these meetings. The board's position is that the covenant language gives us broad discretion to determine what constitutes a nuisance. While snowmobiling may be common in Montana generally, Pine Ridge is a quiet residential community that attracts people specifically looking for peace and tranquility. Then maybe those people should not have bought homes next to a national forest with snowmobile trails, I said. The trails were here before this subdivision was built. Nevertheless, Patricia interjected, the board has voted to impose restrictions. Effective immediately, you are prohibited from operating your snowmobile in any manner that can be heard from residential properties within Pine Ridge. Violation will result in fines of $500 per incident. I stared at her. That's impossible. Any snowmobile can be heard from neighboring properties. You are essentially banning me from using my own property. You can use your snowmobile, Patricia said with a thin smile. You just need to do so quietly. That's absurd and you know it. That's the board's decision. This meeting is adjourned. She rapped the gavel again. I stood there, furious and disbelieving as the board members gathered their papers and started to leave. Jake put a hand on my shoulder. You need to get a lawyer, he said quietly. I knew he was right, but lawyers were expensive and I had already blown through most of my savings on the divorce. The thought of spending thousands more to fight an HOA over snowmobile rights made me sick. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling and running through my options. I could comply with Patricia's ridiculous restrictions and effectively give up snowmobiling. I could fight it in court, which would cost money I did not really have and take months or years to resolve. Or I could ignore the restrictions and see what happened. Wednesday morning, I decided on option 3. I was not going to let Patricia bully me into giving up something I loved. I loaded up my gear and headed out to the trails around 11 a.m. It was a beautiful day, clear and cold, with fresh powder from the night before. I spent 2 hours riding, deliberately taking the trail that ran closest to Pine Ridge so my Arctic Cat's engine would be clearly audible. When I got home, there was already an envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a violation notice and a fine for $500, payable within 30 days. It was dated that same day and cited the emergency restrictions from last night's meeting. I took a photo of the notice and emailed it to a lawyer friend from college who practiced in Missoula. He called me back that afternoon. This is definitely overreach, he said. HOAs have broad powers, but they can impose arbitrary restrictions that effectively prevent you from using your property. The problem is fighting it will cost you probably $3,000 to $5,000 in legal fees, and there's no guarantee you will recover those costs even if you win. So what should I do? Honestly, keep documenting everything. Keep riding if you want to. Let them rack up fines. Don't pay them. Eventually, they will have to either sue you or back down. If they sue, you will have a better case because you can show a pattern of harassment and overreach, but it's going to be ugly." I thanked him and hung up, feeling even more frustrated. This was exactly what Patricia wanted, to make my life so difficult that I would either comply or move away. Thursday, I got another email from Patricia stating that the HOA had received continuing reports of violations, and that I now owed $1,000 in fines. I did not respond. Instead, I went riding again, this time inviting Jake to come along. He had his own snowmobile, an older Ski-Doo, and he had been riding these trails for years without any complaints. "You sure you want to do this?" Jake asked as we geared up in my garage. "I'm sure," I said. "If Patricia wants to fine me for enjoying my own property, she can try to collect. I'm not backing down." We spent 3 hours out on the trails, connecting up with some other riders from the local snowmobile club. Everyone I talked to was shocked when I told them about the HOA restrictions. Several of them lived in subdivisions around Whitefish and had never heard of anyone trying to ban snowmobiles. "That's insane," said a guy named Marcus who worked as a ski instructor at Whitefish Mountain Resort. "Half the people in this valley own sleds. It's like banning skiing." When I got home that evening, there was another violation notice. Another $500. I was now up to $1,500 in fines that I had no intention of paying. Friday morning, I was working at my desk when I heard a vehicle pull into my driveway. I looked out and saw a Flathead County Sheriff's Department cruiser. My heart sank. Patricia had actually called the cops. I went to the door and opened it before the deputy could knock. He was a young guy, probably late 20s, with a friendly face and the build of someone who spent his free time outdoors. His nameplate read Deputy Morrison. "Morning," he said. "Are you Nathan Vaughn?" "I am," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What can I do for you?" "I got a call from a Patricia Henderson about a noise complaint. She said you have been operating a snowmobile in violation of HOA rules, and she wanted me to come out and, quote, make you understand the seriousness of the situation." I felt a mixture of anger and relief. Anger at Patricia for wasting law enforcement's time, relief that the deputy seemed approachable. "She really called the sheriff over an HOA dispute," Deputy Morrison shrugged. "She called dispatch 3 times yesterday. My sergeant finally told me to come out here and at least talk to you so she would stop calling." "Want to come in?" I asked. "Sure." I led him into my kitchen and offered him coffee, which he accepted. We sat at my table and I explained the whole situation, showing him the email exchanges, the violation notices, and the HOA covenants. He listened carefully, occasionally nodding. "So let me get this straight," he said when I finished. "You are riding on public trails during the day, and she wants you stopped because of noise. That's the situation. And the HOA covenants don't actually mention snowmobiles, correct? She's using a vague nuisance clause to justify it." Deputy Morrison shook his head. "I've got to be honest with you, this is not a criminal matter. This is a civil dispute between you and your HOA. I can't do anything about it." "I figured as much," I said. "I'm sorry she wasted your time." "Don't worry about it," he said. Then he grinned. "Actually, I have got a question for you. You said you have been riding the trails around here. How are they?" "I just moved to Whitefish in August and I have been looking for good places to ride. I have got a Polaris, but I have not taken it out much yet." I blinked, surprised by the sudden shift in conversation. "They are fantastic, some of the best riding in Montana." "Yeah. Where do you usually go?" I pulled up a map on my phone and showed him. "The main trailhead is right at the edge of the national forest, about half a mile from here. That connects to the whole Whitefish Trail system. You can ride all the way up to Big Mountain if you want, or head south toward Columbia Falls. The Snowmobile Club grooms most of the major routes. Deputy Morrison leaned forward, studying the map. Which trails would you recommend for someone who's still learning the area? The loop that goes around Beaver Lake is great. It's about 15 miles, mostly flat, well marked. From there you can branch off to harder terrain if you want. That sounds perfect, he said. What about the trail that runs behind this subdivision? Is that part of the system? Yeah, that's actually the connector trail. It runs right along the national forest boundary. That is the one Patricia is complaining about, he laughed. So she is complaining about a public trail that anyone can use, basically. Man, she must be fun at parties. He drained his coffee and stood up. Well, I will write up a report saying I made contact and determined it's a civil matter. If she calls again, dispatch will just tell her to hire a lawyer. I appreciate it, I said. No problem. And hey, if you are ever heading out on the trails and want company, let me know. I'm usually off on Saturdays. I gave him my number and he saved it in his phone. As he was leaving, he turned back. For what it's worth, I think your HOA president is out of line. You have every right to use those trails. Don't let her bully you. After he left, I felt significantly better. The fact that a law enforcement officer agreed Patricia was overreaching validated everything I had been thinking. I texted Jake to tell him what happened, and he responded with a string of laughing emojis. That evening, I got a furious email from Patricia demanding to know what I had said to the deputy. Apparently, he had stopped by the community center on his way out of the subdivision and told her in no uncertain terms that this was not a police matter, and she needed to stop calling 911 for civil disputes. She was threatening to file a formal complaint with the sheriff's department for failure to enforce community standards. I did not bother responding. Saturday morning, Deputy Morrison texted me asking if I was riding that day. I told him I was planning to head out around 10. He showed up at my house at 9:45 with his Polaris loaded in the bed of his truck, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "Ready to show me those trails?" he asked. We unloaded our sleds and headed out. The weather was perfect, bright sunshine and about 25 degrees. I took him on the Beaver Lake loop first, letting him get a feel for the terrain. He was a decent rider, confident but not reckless. After the loop, we stopped at a warming hut maintained by the Snowmobile Club and had some hot chocolate from our thermoses. "This is incredible," Deputy Morrison said, looking out at the mountains. "I grew up in Great Falls and we had nothing like this." "Montana's got some of the best snowmobiling in the country," I said. "That is one of the reasons I moved to Whitefish." "Where did you live before?" "Billings." "I worked in an office there, but my company went remote during COVID and never went back. I figured if I could work from anywhere, I might as well pick somewhere with good outdoor access." "Smart move." He took a sip of his hot chocolate. "So what's your plan with the HOA thing?" "You going to fight them?" "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "My lawyer friend says I have a good case, but it will be expensive. Part of me wants to just keep ignoring them and see what they do." "They will probably put a lien on your property eventually," Deputy Morrison said. "That is what HOAs usually do when people don't pay fines." "Can they actually do that?" "Unfortunately, yeah. Montana law gives HOAs pretty broad collection powers. But the lien has to go through the courts first, and a judge might not look kindly on fines for something that isn't actually prohibited in the covenants." We finished our hot chocolate and headed back out. I showed him some more advanced trails, including a section that wound through dense forest with some challenging turns. By the time we got back to my house around 3 p.m., we had covered almost 50 miles. Deputy Morrison was exhausted but happy. "Thanks for showing me around," he said as he loaded his Polaris back onto his truck. "This was the best Saturday I have had since I moved here." "Anytime," I said. "And seriously, if you want to ride again, just let me know. I will definitely take you up on that." Monday morning, I received a certified letter from a law firm in Kalispell representing the Pine Ridge HOA. The letter stated that I owed $2,000 in fines for repeated and willful violations of HOA restrictions, and that if I did not pay within 15 days, the HOA would begin lien proceedings against my property. The letter also demanded that I immediately cease all snowmobile activity or face additional penalties. I called my lawyer friend in Missoula. He recommended I hire someone local who specialized in HOA law. He gave me the name of an attorney in Kalispell named Sarah Mitchell, who had a reputation for taking on overzealous HOAs. I called her office and managed to get an appointment for Wednesday afternoon. In the meantime, I kept riding. Every time I fired up my Arctic Cat, I imagined Patricia watching from her window and seething. It was petty, but it felt good. Wednesday, I drove to Kalispell and met with Sarah Mitchell. She was in her 50s, sharply dressed, with graying hair and intelligent eyes. I laid out the whole situation, and she took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "This is a pretty straightforward case of HOA overreach," she said when I finished. "The problem is that fighting it will cost money and time. I can draft a response to their demand letter pointing out that the restrictions are invalid, but if they proceed with the lien, we will have to go to court. How much are we talking? My retainer is $2,500. If it goes to court, you are looking at another $3,000 to $5,000, depending on how long it drags out. The good news is that if we win, the judge can order the HOA to pay your attorney fees. Montana law allows for fee shifting in cases where the HOA acts in bad faith." I thought about it. The money was steep, but the alternative was backing down and letting Patricia win. "Let's do it," I said. Sarah drafted a response letter that went out the next day. It was beautiful, a point-by-point demolition of the HOA's position. She noted that the covenants did not prohibit snowmobiles, that the nuisance clause was unconstitutionally vague as applied, that the emergency meeting had not provided adequate notice, and that the fines were arbitrary and excessive. She concluded by demanding that the HOA rescind all fines and restrictions or face litigation for harassment and abuse of authority. The response was a declaration of war, and we both knew it. Patricia's reply came within 48 hours. The HOA was proceeding with lien proceedings and had voted to increase my fines to $5,000. They also hired a private investigator to document my snowmobile use. "They hired a PI," Jake said when I told him. "That is insane." "That is Patricia," I said. Sure enough, over the next week, I spotted a gray sedan parked on the street near my house several times. The driver had a camera with a telephoto lens and was clearly taking photos of me whenever I loaded or unloaded my snowmobile. I waved at him once and he quickly drove away. Sarah filed a motion in Flathead County District Court to block the lien and challenge the fines. The hearing was scheduled for late January, about 3 weeks away. In the meantime, the HOA's harassment escalated. Patricia sent emails to other residents warning them about my dangerous and illegal activities. She claimed, without any evidence, that snowmobiles posed safety risks to children and pets. Several neighbors stopped talking to me, apparently believing her propaganda, but not everyone bought it. Jake remained solidly in my corner, and a few other residents reached out privately to express support. One of them, a retired teacher named Ellen, told me that Patricia had been targeting people for years, and she was glad someone was finally standing up to her. "She tried to fine me for having wind chimes," Ellen said. "Wind chimes. She said they were noise pollution. Did you fight it?" "No, I just took them down. I wish I had fought it now. Maybe if more of us had stood up to her, she would not be so out of control." The week before the court hearing, Deputy Morrison texted me to ask if I wanted to go riding again. I told him about the PI and the upcoming hearing. He was furious. "She hired a private investigator. Are you kidding me?" "Nope. HOA money hard at work. That is ridiculous. You are not doing anything wrong." We went riding anyway, and I made sure to take routes that were clearly visible from the road. If Patricia wanted documentation of me using public trails legally, she could have all she wanted. The court hearing was on a Thursday morning. Sarah and I arrived at the Flathead County Courthouse in Kalispell at 8:30. The HOA was represented by their attorney, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit named Bradley Cooper, no relation to the actor. Patricia was there too, sitting behind him with a satisfied expression. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Judge Rebecca Torres. She had a reputation for being fair but no nonsense. Sarah had told me that was good for us because judges generally did not like HOAs that overstepped their authority. The hearing took about 90 minutes. Bradley Cooper argued that the HOA had broad discretion to interpret the covenants, and that snowmobile noise constituted a nuisance under any reasonable standard. Sarah countered that the covenants were a contract and had to be interpreted based on their plain language, which did not mention snowmobiles. She also argued that the HOA's actions were retaliatory and in bad faith, pointing to the rushed emergency meeting, the escalating fines, and the hiring of a private investigator. Judge Torres asked pointed questions of both attorneys. At one point, she asked Bradley Cooper to show her where in the covenant snowmobiles were prohibited. He could not, obviously, and fell back on the nuisance clause. She did not look impressed. "Mr. Cooper," she said, "a nuisance clause is not a blank check for the HOA to prohibit any activity it dislikes. There has to be some objective standard. What is the objective standard here?" "The noise level, Your Honor. Multiple residents have complained about the noise." "How many residents?" 3, Your Honor." "Out of how many total homes in the subdivision?" Bradley Cooper hesitated. 62, Your Honor." "So less than 5% of residents have complained." "The number of complaints does not diminish their validity, Your Honor." "Perhaps not, but it does raise questions about whether this is truly a community-wide problem or a personal dispute." Judge Torres flipped through the file in front of her. "I also note that Mr. Vaughn is using public trails, not private property. Is the HOA claiming authority to restrict activities that occur off HOA property?" "The noise travels onto HOA property, Your Honor." "So does noise from cars, planes, and wind. Is the HOA going to ban those too?" There were a few chuckles in the courtroom. Bradley Cooper looked flustered. "Your Honor, the HOA is simply trying to maintain community standards. By imposing $5,000 in fines for an activity not prohibited in the covenants," Judge Torres said, "that does not sound like maintaining standards. That sounds like harassment." She ruled from the bench. The lien was blocked, the fines were vacated, and the HOA was ordered to pay my attorney fees. She also issued an injunction prohibiting the HOA from imposing any further restrictions on my snowmobile use, unless they formally amended the covenants through the proper procedure, which required a vote of all homeowners. Patricia looked like she had been slapped. Bradley Cooper gathered his papers quickly and left without comment. Sarah shook my hand, grinning. That went about as well as it possibly could have. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over. I had won, but I was wrong. It was not over. The following Monday, I received an email from Patricia informing me that the HOA board had voted to hold a special meeting to amend the covenants to explicitly prohibit snowmobiles. The vote would take place in 2 weeks and required a 2/3 majority of homeowners. "She's not going to let this go," I told Jake. "Then we need to make sure the vote fails," Jake said. "We need to talk to people, get them on your side." Over the next 2 weeks, I went door to door talking to my neighbors. Most of them were reasonable once they heard my side of the story. Several admitted they had never actually heard my snowmobile and were surprised by Patricia's characterization of it as excessively loud. A few were snowmobilers themselves and were appalled by the idea of banning the activity. Patricia, meanwhile, was running her own campaign. She sent multiple emails warning about noise, safety hazards, and property values. She claimed that allowing snowmobiles would turn Pine Ridge into a motorsports park and drive families away. It was fear-mongering at its finest. Ellen, the retired teacher, became one of my most vocal supporters. She organized a counter-email campaign, sending out messages that explained the facts and urged people to vote against the amendment. She even started a petition opposing the ban that garnered signatures from 30 of the 62 homeowners. The special meeting was held on a Tuesday evening at the community center. Nearly every homeowner showed up, making it the most well-attended HOA meeting in years. The tension in the room was palpable. Patricia called the meeting to order and launched into a presentation about why the amendment was necessary. She had charts showing noise complaints over time, which mostly consisted of her own complaints and 2 others. She had photos of my snowmobile, taken by the PI, which she claimed showed dangerous equipment. She even had quotes from random internet articles about snowmobile accidents, as if that was relevant. When she finished, she opened the floor for discussion. I stood up immediately. "I want to address some of the claims that have been made," I said. "First, snowmobiling is a legal activity on public trails. The trails around Pine Ridge have existed for decades. Second, I have been riding during reasonable daytime hours, not early in the morning or late at night. Third, the covenants as they currently stand say nothing about snowmobiles because the people who wrote them did not think it was necessary to ban a common recreational activity. This amendment is not about protecting the community. It is about one person's personal vendetta against me." Several people nodded. Jake stood up next. "I have lived in Pine Ridge for 8 years and I have been snowmobiling the whole time. No one ever complained until Nathan bought his sled. This is absolutely about Patricia wanting to control what people do on their own property." Ellen stood up. "I have known Patricia for 5 years and I have seen her target multiple residents over petty issues. This is who she is. If we let her ban snowmobiles today, what is she going to ban tomorrow? Dogs barking, kids playing outside. Where does it end?" Other people started speaking up, some in support of the amendment, most against it. The meeting went on for over an hour, getting increasingly heated. Patricia tried to maintain order but lost control of the room several times. Finally, she called for the vote. Ballots were distributed and collected. Linda Morrison, the vice president, counted them while the room waited in tense silence. "The results are 38 votes against the amendment, 21 votes in favor, and 3 abstentions," Linda announced. The amendment had failed. It was not even close. Patricia sat in stunned silence. Several people applauded. I felt a surge of relief and triumph. It was finally, truly over, except it still was not. 2 days later, I got a call from Deputy Morrison. "Hey, I need to talk to you about something." "Can you stop by the sheriff's office? Is everything okay?" I asked, feeling a twinge of anxiety. "Yeah, nothing bad. I just need to show you something. I drove to the Flathead County Sheriff's Office in Kalispell that afternoon. Deputy Morrison met me in the lobby and led me to a small conference room. On the table were several documents. "What is this?" I asked. "Complaints filed against Patricia Henderson," he said. "Turns out, after you beat her in court and the HOA vote, she started filing false police reports." "False reports about what?" "About you. She claimed you were threatening her, stalking her, trespassing on her property. She called 911 3 times in 2 days. Each time we sent a deputy out and found no evidence of any wrongdoing." Finally, my sergeant looked into it and realized what was happening. I stared at the documents, feeling a mixture of anger and disbelief. "She filed false reports?" "Yeah, and that's a crime in Montana. Filing a false police report is a misdemeanor, but doing it repeatedly can be charged as a felony under certain circumstances." "Are you going to arrest her?" "We are investigating. I'm not supposed to tell you this, but I thought you should know what is going on. If she keeps coming after you, you need to document everything." I thanked him and left, my head spinning. Patricia had completely lost it. She had gone from annoying HOA president to someone willing to commit crimes to get her way. The next week, I was working from home when I heard shouting outside. I looked out the window and saw Patricia in my driveway, yelling at my house. I grabbed my phone and started recording as I went outside. "You ruined everything," she screamed when she saw me. "This was a good neighborhood until you showed up with your trashy toys and your refusal to follow the rules. Patricia, you need to leave my property," I said calmly, keeping the phone pointed at her. "I will not leave. You think you can humiliate me and get away with it. You think you can turn my neighbors against me. I did not turn anyone against you. You did that yourself. This is not over. I will make sure you regret moving here. Patricia, I'm asking you one more time to leave. If you don't, I'm calling the sheriff." She lunged at me. I stepped back quickly, but she grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. I pulled away and she stumbled, falling onto the driveway. She sat there for a moment, then started screaming that I had assaulted her. I immediately called 911. The dispatcher recognized my address from previous calls and sounded weary. "Is this about the HOA dispute again? Patricia Henderson is on my property. She attacked me, and now she's claiming I assaulted her. I have video of the whole thing. Deputies are on the way." 2 sheriff's cruisers arrived within 10 minutes. One of the deputies was Morrison. The other was an older deputy named Sergeant Williams. Patricia was still in my driveway, now crying and claiming I had pushed her down. I showed both deputies the video. It clearly showed Patricia lunging at me, grabbing my arm and falling when I pulled away. Morrison watched it twice, his face grim. "Miss Henderson, you are under arrest for assault and trespassing," he said. Patricia's face went white. "What? No, he assaulted me. The video shows otherwise." "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." "This is ridiculous. I am the victim here." Sergeant Williams stepped in. "Madam, you need to comply or we will add resisting arrest to the charges." Patricia finally complied, tears streaming down her face as Morrison handcuffed her. They led her to one of the cruisers and drove away. Sergeant Williams stayed behind to take my statement and get a copy of the video. "I am sorry it came to this," he said. "We had been hoping she would just back off, but some people don't know when to quit." "What happens now?" I asked. "She will be booked, arraigned, and probably released on her own recognizance. Given the previous false reports and now this, the county attorney will probably charge her pretty aggressively. You will need to come testify if it goes to trial. I will do whatever you need." Patricia was charged with assault, criminal trespass, and 3 counts of filing false police reports. The The story made the local news, with reporters describing her as an HOA president accused of harassment campaign. It was humiliating for her, but I could not muster much sympathy. She had brought this on herself. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Patricia as president. Linda Morrison took over as acting president and sent an email to all residents apologizing for the chaos and promising a return to normal operations. Several board members resigned in embarrassment over the situation. Patricia's criminal case moved forward. She hired a defense attorney who tried to portray her as a concerned community leader who had been unfairly targeted. But the video of her attacking me, combined with the documented pattern of false reports and harassment, made it impossible to defend. In March, she pleaded no contest to the assault and false report charges in exchange for the trespassing charge being dropped. The judge sentenced her to 6 months in county jail, suspended on the condition that she complete anger management counseling and stay away from me. She was also fined $2,000 and ordered to pay restitution for the sheriff's department resources wasted on her false reports. At the sentencing hearing, Patricia stood before the judge and finally, for the first time, seemed to grasp the consequences of her actions. She cried and apologized, saying she had let her emotions get the best of her. The judge was unmoved. "Miss Henderson, you abused your position as HOA president to harass a neighbor over a petty dispute," Judge Torres said. It was the same judge who had ruled against the HOA in the Leon case. When the legal system told you that you were wrong, you responded by filing false police reports and ultimately committing assault. That shows a fundamental lack of respect for the law and for your fellow citizens. You are fortunate that Mr. Vaughn was not seriously injured and that this court is willing to give you a chance to rehabilitate yourself. Do not waste that chance. After the sentencing, I left the courthouse feeling a strange mix of emotions. I had won, completely and utterly. Patricia had been held accountable, but the whole situation had been exhausting and unnecessary. All of it could have been avoided if she had just left me alone. Deputy Morrison, now just Ryan since we had become genuine friends through all of this, met me for lunch after the hearing. We went to a burger place in Kalispell and sat by the window watching snow fall. "That was quite a saga," he said. "Tell me about it. I just wanted to ride my snowmobile. And now you can without anyone giving you grief." "Yeah." Although honestly, after everything that happened, it almost feels weird to just go out and ride without worrying about who's watching or what complaint is coming next. Ryan grinned. "Then let's go this weekend and make it normal again. I found a new trail up near Eureka that's supposed to be incredible. You're on." That Saturday, we loaded up our snowmobiles and headed north to Eureka. The trail was everything Ryan had promised, winding through pristine wilderness with views of the Canadian Rockies in the distance. We rode for 6 hours, covering nearly 70 miles, and did not see another person the entire time. Sitting in a warming hut at the turnaround point, eating sandwiches and drinking hot coffee, I realized I felt more relaxed than I had in months. The weight of the HOA drama had finally lifted. Patricia was gone, the restrictions were gone, and I was free to enjoy the thing I loved without looking over my shoulder. "This was perfect," I said to Ryan. "Better than dealing with HOA meetings, infinitely better." We laughed and finished our lunch, then headed back. The ride home was spectacular, with the late afternoon sun turning the snow golden and the mountains purple in the distance. It was exactly why I had moved to Montana in the first place. Over the following weeks, life in Pine Ridge returned to something resembling normal. Linda Morrison proved to be a reasonable HOA president who actually followed the rules and treated residents with respect. The board implemented new procedures to prevent any one person from having too much power. Several people apologized to me for believing Patricia's propaganda without hearing my side. Jake and I became even closer friends, often riding together on weekends. Ellen, the retired teacher, started joining us occasionally on her own snowmobile that she had bought years ago but rarely used. We formed a little informal riding group, exploring trails all over northwest Montana. I also started volunteering with the local snowmobile club, helping with trail maintenance and grooming. It felt good to give back to the community that had provided me with so much enjoyment. The club members welcomed me enthusiastically, and several of them had heard about my HOA battle and thought it was hilarious that a deputy had asked me for trail directions while investigating a complaint against me. "That's the most Montana thing I've ever heard," said Tom, the club president, when I told him the story. "The cop shows up to bust you and ends up wanting to go riding instead." Ryan became a regular at club events and quickly proved himself to be one of the more skilled riders. He had a natural talent for navigating difficult terrain and was always willing to help newer riders learn the ropes. He also used his position as a deputy to advocate for snowmobiler rights, pushing back against occasional complaints from tourists who did not understand that snowmobiling was a way of life in Montana. One evening in April, as the riding season was winding down, the club held a banquet at a restaurant in Whitefish. Awards were given out for various achievements, including most miles ridden, best trail maintenance volunteer, and most improved rider. At the end of the night, Tom stood up with a special announcement. "We have one more award to give out," he said. "This year, one of our members faced significant challenges to his right to ride. He stood up to bullying and harassment, fought the good fight, and won. In the process, he showed a lot of people that snowmobilers are not the loud, irresponsible stereotypes that some folks try to paint us as. Nathan Vaughn, come on up here." I was surprised and a little embarrassed as I walked to the front of the room. Tom handed me a plaque that read Snowmobiler of the Year along with a picture of me and Ryan on our sleds. "Thanks," I said, not sure what else to say. "I really just wanted to ride my snowmobile, but I appreciate all the support from this club. You guys made the fight worth it." Everyone applauded, and several people came up afterward to shake my hand and share their own stories of dealing with difficult neighbors or restrictive rules. It was a good reminder that I was not alone in facing these kinds of challenges. As spring arrived and the snow began to melt, I spent more time thinking about what I wanted from the next chapter of my life. The divorce, the move to Montana, the HOA battle, all of it had been part of a difficult transition period. But I was on the other side of it now, and I was stronger for having gone through it. In May, I got a call from Sarah Mitchell, my attorney. "I have good news," she said. "Patricia Henderson's attorney reached out. She wants to settle the attorney fees judgment without going through collections. She's offering to pay the full amount plus interest." Really? I think the criminal conviction scared her straight. She does not want any more legal trouble. That works for me. The check arrived a week later. It was not a huge amount, around $4,000, but it felt vindicating nonetheless. I used part of it to upgrade my snowmobile gear and donated the rest to the snowmobile club for trail maintenance. In June, the HOA held elections for board positions. Linda Morrison was elected president by a wide margin, and several new members joined the board who were committed to transparency and fairness. At the first meeting under the new board, they formally apologized to me on behalf of the association and rescinded every violation notice that Patricia had issued during her tenure. We want Pine Ridge to be a place where people feel welcome and respected, Linda said during the meeting. What happened to Nathan should never have happened, and we are going to make sure it does not happen again. I appreciated the gesture, though part of me would have preferred if they had just left me alone from the beginning. But I understood that HOAs, like any organization, were only as good as the people running them. As summer progressed, I found myself enjoying Montana in new ways. I took up mountain biking on the same trails I rode my snowmobile in winter. I went fly fishing in the rivers around Flathead Valley. I hiked in Glacier National Park. Ryan and I stayed friends, often meeting up for outdoor adventures. He introduced me to rock climbing and I introduced him to fly fishing. We made a good team. In August, Jake invited me to his daughter's wedding. It was a beautiful outdoor ceremony at a ranch outside of Columbia Falls, with the Rocky Mountains as a backdrop. During the reception, Jake pulled me aside. "I never properly thanked you," he said. "For what?" "For standing up to Patricia. A lot of us had complaints about her over the years, but nobody wanted to rock the boat. You showed us that it was possible to fight back and win. The HOA is a completely different place now because of you." "I didn't do it to be a hero," I said. "I just wanted to ride my snowmobile." "I know. But you became one anyway." I thought about that conversation a lot in the following weeks. I had never set out to change anything or prove a point. I had just wanted to live my life without interference. But sometimes standing up for yourself has ripple effects that go beyond your immediate situation. The HOA was better now. The neighborhood was better. And I was better too, more confident and less willing to let people push me around. When October arrived and the first snow fell, I felt a surge of excitement. Riding season was starting again. I spent a weekend getting my Arctic Cat ready, changing the oil, checking the belts, making sure everything was in perfect working order. Ryan did the same with his Polaris, and we made plans to hit the trails as soon as there was enough snow. The first ride of the season was on a crisp November morning. The trails were freshly groomed and covered in 6 inches of powder. Ryan and I met at the trailhead at dawn and rode until midday, covering 40 miles through terrain that felt both familiar and brand new. At one point, we stopped on a ridge overlooking the Flathead Valley, the sun sparkling off the snow-covered landscape below. "This is why we do it," Ryan said. "This is why we fight for it," I replied. He nodded, understanding exactly what I meant. Freedom, in the end, was not something you were given. It was something you had to defend, sometimes against people who thought they knew better than you what was good for you. Patricia Henderson had tried to take away something I loved, and she had failed. The trails were still here. The mountains were still here. And I was still here, riding through them with a friend by my side. As we headed back toward Pine Ridge that afternoon, I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. The emails, the meetings, the fines, the court case, the arrest. All of it seemed almost surreal now, like a story that had happened to someone else. But it had been real, and it had mattered. Not just to me, but to everyone who had been living under Patricia's thumb and did not know they could push back. When I got home that evening, I saw a letter in my mailbox from the HOA. For a split second, my stomach tensed. Then I remembered that Patricia was gone and Linda was in charge now. I opened the letter. It was an invitation to a neighborhood holiday party in December, along with a personal note from Linda thanking me again for my patience during the difficult transition period. I put the letter on my kitchen counter and looked out at my garage where the Arctic Cat sat, covered in snow and mud from the day's ride. Next to it was my mountain bike, my camping gear, my fishing rods, all the tools of a life well lived in Montana. I had come here after my divorce looking for a fresh start, and I had found it. But it had not come easy. I had to fight for it, defend it, and prove that I belonged here just as much as anyone else. And in the end, that fight had made the victory sweeter. The next weekend, the Snowmobile Club organized a group ride to celebrate the start of the season. About 20 of us gathered at the trailhead, a mix of experienced riders and newcomers. Tom gave a brief safety talk. We checked everyone's gear, and then we headed out into the backcountry. The day was perfect, cold and clear with unlimited visibility. We rode in a loose formation, spreading out on the wider sections and regrouping at intersections. At lunch, sitting around a bonfire someone had built at a shelter, people swapped stories about past rides, close calls, and favorite trails. The conversation eventually turned to the HOA situation, which had become something of a legend in local snowmobiling circles. "I heard the cop who showed up to investigate actually became your riding buddy," someone said. "That's true," I confirmed, nodding toward Ryan, who was standing nearby. "Best thing that came out of the whole mess. And the HOA president got arrested. Also true. Man, what are the odds?" Tom said, shaking his head. "You get reported for noise, the deputy shows up, and instead of citing you, he asks for trail recommendations. That's like winning the lottery." "It felt like it at the time," I said. Although honestly, even if he had sided with the HOA, I don't think it would have changed anything. It was a civil matter, not a criminal one. Still, pretty lucky that he turned out to be a good guy. I looked over at Ryan, who was helping a newer rider adjust the suspension on his sled. Yeah, I was lucky. The afternoon ride took us deeper into the national forest, through areas I had never explored before. The terrain was more challenging, with steep climbs and technical descents that required focus and skill. By the time we made it back to the trailhead around 4 p.m., everyone was exhausted but exhilarated. It had been a perfect day. As the season progressed, I settled into a comfortable rhythm. Work during the week, riding on weekends, occasional club events, and volunteer shifts. The conflict with Patricia faded into memory, becoming just another story to tell when people asked how I liked living in Montana. In February, a year after the whole saga had begun, I was interviewed by a local outdoor magazine about the HOA battle. The reporter was interested in the broader issue of property rights and how HOAs sometimes overstep their authority. I talked about my experience and emphasized that I had not been trying to make a statement. I had just been defending my right to enjoy a legal activity on my own property. "What advice would you give to someone in a similar situation?" the reporter asked. "Document everything," I said. "Keep records of all communications, know your rights, and don't be afraid to push back when someone is clearly in the wrong. But also pick your battles." This could have cost me a lot more than it did if I had not had a good lawyer and a judge who saw through the nonsense. Do you think HOAs serve a useful purpose? They can, if they are run by reasonable people who respect residents' rights. The problem is that they attract a certain type of person who likes having power over their neighbors. When that happens, you get situations like mine. The article came out in March and generated a lot of discussion online. I got emails from people all over the country sharing their own HOA horror stories. Some were worse than mine, involving tens of thousands of dollars in fines or foreclosures over minor violations. It made me realize how lucky I had been that my situation had resolved relatively quickly and in my favor. By the time spring arrived again and the riding season ended, I felt completely settled in Montana. Pine Ridge was home now, not just a place I lived. The neighbors who had supported me had become friends. The ones who had sided with Patricia had either moved away or quietly accepted that they had been wrong. Ryan and I planned a summer trip to explore some of the hiking trails in Glacier National Park. Ellen invited me to join her book club, which met monthly and was surprisingly fun despite my initial skepticism. Jake and I started a tradition of Friday night dinners at a local brewery where we would recap the week and plan weekend adventures. One evening in May, I was sitting on my back deck watching the sunset when my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize with a Montana area code. "Hello, is this Nathan Vaughn?" a woman's voice asked. "It is. My name is Jennifer Rogers. I'm a homeowner in the Meadowbrook subdivision in Bozeman. I'm having a problem with my HOA and someone gave me your name. They said you successfully fought your HOA over snowmobile restrictions." "That's correct. I'm dealing with something similar. They're trying to ban ATVs even though the covenants don't mention them. I was hoping you could give me some advice." I spent the next 45 minutes talking her through what I had learned, recommending Sarah Mitchell as an attorney, and emphasizing the importance of building support among other homeowners. By the end of the call, Jennifer sounded more confident and less overwhelmed. "Thank you so much," she said. "I was starting to think I was crazy for fighting this." "You're not crazy. You're standing up for your rights. Don't let them bully you into backing down." After we hung up, I sat there thinking about how strange life was. A year ago, I had been in Jennifer's position, confused and angry and looking for guidance. Now I was the one offering advice. The cycle continued, and hopefully, each person who stood up to an overreaching HOA made it a little easier for the next person to do the same. As summer turned to fall, and the first hints of winter appeared in the mountains, I found myself looking forward to riding season with the same excitement as the previous year, but without the anxiety. There would be no complaints this time, no violation notices, no late-night emails from angry HOA presidents. Just me, my snowmobile, and hundreds of miles of pristine Montana trails. The first significant snowfall came in late October. Ryan texted me immediately. "Trails are calling. You ready?" I was ready. I had been ready all summer. We rode that weekend and every weekend after for the rest of the season. Some rides were just the two of us. Others included the whole snowmobile club. We explored new areas, revisited favorite spots, and logged thousands of miles across northwest Montana. Every time I fired up my Arctic Cat and headed out into the backcountry, I felt grateful. Grateful for the freedom to pursue what I loved, grateful for the friends who had supported me, and grateful that I had been willing to fight when it mattered. Looking back, the whole HOA situation seemed almost inevitable. Patricia had been looking for a fight, and I had been unwilling to back down. The collision was bound to happen eventually, but what could have been a disaster had turned into something positive. The HOA was better. The community was stronger. And I had learned that standing up for yourself, even when it was difficult and expensive and exhausting, was worth it. The mountains did not care about HOA covenants or property disputes or the petty grievances of small-minded people. They just existed, vast and indifferent and beautiful. And as long as I could ride through them on my snowmobile, feeling the cold wind on my face and the thunder of the engine beneath me, everything else was just noise. That was the lesson, really. Life was too short to let other people's anger and control issues dictate how you lived. Patricia had tried to take something away from me, and she had failed. The trails were still there. The mountains were still there. And I was still there, riding through them, free and happy and exactly where I was meant to be. As I pulled into my garage one snowy evening in December, my Arctic Cat covered in fresh powder and my body aching pleasantly from a long day of riding, I realized that I had not thought about the HOA drama in weeks. It had become just another chapter in my life. Important at the time, but ultimately just a hurdle I had cleared on the way to something better. Ryan pulled up behind me, parking his Polaris next to mine. We unloaded our gear in comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who have been through something difficult together and come out the other side. "Good ride today," he said finally. "The best," I agreed, and it was. Not because the trails had been particularly challenging or the views especially stunning, though both were true, but because I was doing exactly what I wanted to do, without anyone telling me I could not, and that freedom was worth more than any amount of money or any victory in court. The HOA had called the sheriff on my snowmobile noise, and the deputy had asked for directions to better trails. It was the kind of story that sounded too perfect to be true, but it had happened exactly that way. And in the end, it had led to something I never expected: a genuine friendship, a stronger community, and an unshakable conviction that fighting for what you believe in, even over something as simple as the right to ride a snowmobile, was always worth it. I locked up my garage and headed inside, already looking forward to next weekend's ride and all the weekends that would follow. The mountains would still be there. The trails would still be there. And so would I, living the life I had chosen on my own terms, in the place I now called home.